Mon nom est Guy Laforêt, je suis le président de la Fédération des sciences humaines du Canada et directeur général de l'École nationale d'administration publique. Et j'ai le plaisir de vous accueillir ici ce matin avec notre directeur général, M. Gabriel Miller, et toute l'équipe de la Fédération. Pour commencer, et en notre nom à toutes et tous, je voudrais reconnaître et exprimer ma gratitude sur le fait que nous nous trouvons sur des terres non cédées par le peuple algonquin. The Federation has joined efforts with the Partnership Group for Science and Engineering, PAGSE, to bring you an exciting conversation this morning, Arctic warming, land and communities on the cusp of rapid change. The talk is going to take place in English with simultaneous interpretation available via cell phone. Si vous avez besoin d'interprétation simultanée, les détails se trouvent sur vos tables. At the Federation, we organize a variety of events. As you see on your tables, we have a talk by Melanie Thomas on gender gaps in about 1 month, and we have our Congress at Regina from May 25th till May 31st, and of course, you are all welcome. Je souhaite remercier tous les amis et supporters des séries d'événements, voire grands et petits déjeuners, avec des têtes à papineau, que la Fédération et le partenariat tiennent sur la colline, en particulier nos députés parrains et nos commanditaires. Je suis très heureux que nous ayons ce matin les professeurs Kutz et Dawson de l'Université de Calgary pour nous lancer dans une discussion animée par M. Pfeifer, défenseur de la communauté Inuit depuis longtemps. Susan Kutz is professor in the Department of Ecosystem and Public Health at the University of Calgary, Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. She has devoted over 2 decades of her life to wildlife health research in the Arctic. Jackie Dawson is the Canada Research Chair in Environment, Society and Policy and Associate Professor in the Department of Geography, also at the U of C. Her work in the Arctic examines the human dimensions of environmental change, closely involving coastal communities affected by changing environmental and social conditions around the globe. Pitseolak Pfeifer is born and raised in Iqaluit, Nunavut. He is building on over 25 years of Inuit advocacy in his studies in Northern Studies at Carleton University. He intersects his expertise in Northern community development with his academic interests in Arctic research governance, Inuit values, and self-determination in projects that address community needs. Avant de leur céder la parole, c'est avec une grande joie que je veux vous présenter le président de la Société royale du Canada. I'm pleased to invite to the podium the President of the Royal Society of Canada, a man to whom we owe a lot in terms of building dynamic and interdisciplinary scientific communities in both English and French in Canada. Chad, please come to the podium.
Merci beaucoup, Guy. Évidemment, je suis ravi d'être ici. You know, when I think about it, l'année 2018, c'est une grande année pour le Canada. We're starting our next 150 years. And when we think about that at the Royal Society of Canada, one of the ways in which we're really going to seize this moment, in fact, to make a better world, is to think about how we can seize the occasion of the fact that Canada's hosting the G7 this year. And as you know, the tradition is that the academies of the G7 countries come together, collaborate, and enrich the political discussion that will be happening throughout the year, starting with the heads in Charlevoix region, Malbaie, and then continuing with ministerials during the year. So I'm delighted to say that in our room today are our academy counterparts from our sister academies across the G7, and I just quickly invite you to welcome them to Canada with us. It's terrific. We've been planning a number of events. You have some working sessions here in Ottawa, but then we have events throughout the year, and please stay tuned with us. I want to just close by saying how we're attempting in many ways to build on the work of the Federation and of the partnership, and it's great to see the event here. It's great to see you all here. We're especially indebted to Jackie Dawson, one of our speakers today, who, as some of you know, was the lead drafter on one of our statements dealing with our digital future, dealing with Arctic sustainability. And I think we're just really excited that today we can get to hear in person some of her research with her colleagues. So thank you very much encore une fois à la Fédération. Merci beaucoup et bon appétit.
Without further ado, but with a 30-second intersection to encourage Minister Jean-Yves Duclos de saluer ses membres du cabinet et de les encourager à avoir la science dans leurs pensées pour le budget de cette année pour lequel nous exprimons notre gratitude, mais aussi for the budget of the next coming years. So Jackie and Susan, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Pitseolak, Pfeifer, and if we were back home in my hometown of Inuit, we would say, instead of good morning, we would say, Udlakut. So please, join me, Udlakut. Wonderful. Well, I appreciate everyone being here today. I was born and raised in Inuit. I am a master's student at Carleton University. Having been born and raised in Nunangat, where I come from, it's a place that I hold dear to my heart. I know my language, and I miss everyone home dearly. It is a trade-off to come down here, spend time, and participate in university studies, but it's important that I'm down here, not only to understand some of the more global perspectives, appreciate academia for its contributions, and I've come to enjoy the opportunities that academia can provide. In that regard, research has some great possibilities to contribute to the development of this country and for Inuit in particular. I see great opportunities for Inuit these days to come and continue to study in universities. We hope to have one up there soon. And, you know, on a morning like this, you can come and appreciate the walk, how it's brisk. And we've actually had a warm spell in Iqaluit a few days ago. It was like spring. It was only -20. So I appreciate everyone being here today. I want to thank both my speakers, Susan and Jackie, coming from their busy lives, and I hope that we can have a conversation together today. My job is to act as moderator. I hope that, that we can move things along, so stay with us, get part of this conversation, look for the connections, because this is an interdisciplinary conversation. Yes, the social sciences and the physical sciences are coming together for us today. And as an Inuk, holistic thinking, as an Indigenous person, it requires to survive that we use holistic thinking. This is the opportunity for us today. Let's take this time and listen and think about the connections. We invite you for questions later. Let's get started. So the challenges are great. And so the title of our conversation, I love the idea of bacon. Love bacon. But the title, Arctic Warming, Land and Communities on the Cusp of Rapid Change. Absolutely, absolutely. Let's start with a brief account of what is happening in the Arctic. Jackie.
Sure. Speaking of random warming, you probably saw in the paper recently, last month, the North Pole was at a record high for, I think, almost a week long, above 6 degrees Celsius. We haven't seen that before. So a lot of crazy temperatures going on. The Coles notes of Arctic climate change is that the region is warming at more than twice the rate of the global average. So far we've seen warming in the Arctic by about 2 degrees. You probably know that we signed a Paris Agreement, well, Canada did, committing to 1.5. We're trying to limit warming to 1.5 degree warming. In the Arctic, we expect that in the next century, the warming might be around 5 degrees. So there's an amplification going on in the Arctic. If you want to know why that's happening biophysically, we can explain that another time. But that's what's going on. And of course, that's leading to glacier retreat, permafrost thawing. People are seeing new species of wildlife in communities we've never seen before. Polar bears are now mating with grizzly bears, and we've got these polar grizzlies that people are talking about. So things are changing in a very rapid way. And as a social scientist, I'm really, well, I guess I'm an interdisciplinary scientist, but I'm really interested in what does that mean for people, for the economy, for society. And one of the big things is that we've seen an extension of the open water season in the Arctic of 19 days over the last decade. So the Northwest Passage, I'm going to talk about that again in a minute, is opening. And what does that mean? What does that mean for society? We think it's going to be ice-free sometime between 2030 and 2070. So we need to prepare for these sort of socioeconomic responses to biophysical changes that are happening in the Arctic.
Thank you, Jackie, for introducing us to the topic. Well, Susan, let's get started with you as well. What are some of the challenges the Arctic warming is posing that your research is taking up? Can you give us a brief synopsis?
Sure. So my work, I'm a veterinarian by trade, and what my work is I work with communities in the Arctic to understand the impacts of a changing environment, like what you saw Kathy present there. How does that impact the health of the animals, and in so doing, how does that affect the health of the people? We use a whole series of lab-based, experimental work, field-based techniques, as well as working with the communities, gathering local knowledge about wildlife health. And I'll just show you a couple examples of what we're seeing here. This is the charismatic muskox, very nice species. But some of the work we're doing is looking at lungworms in muskox and caribou. And the lungworms they have a life cycle that requires development in slugs or snails on the tundra. And there are slugs and snails up in the Arctic. What you see on these figures is different colors. And on the left-hand side, the red indicates where the parasites used to be, where they could establish based on temperatures. And what you see on the right-hand side is where they are today. So since the 1980s to today, you see this rapid change in the climate. And what that means is real biophysical, real impacts on the wildlife and the wildlife health. So the parasites are expanding their range to the north. And we can take that the next step and say how much further will they go under the scenarios that have been the climate change scenarios. Now, this is a lungworm that we don't think actually has a lot of impact on the animals, but at the same time we've been studying this, we've also seen emergence of disease in muskoxen with widespread die-offs of muskoxen on 2 of the Arctic islands, resulting in population declines of about 80% on 1 of the islands. So substantial changes associated with a variety of ecological and climatic changes. So that's the muskoxen, very important to Indigenous people in that area. But across the Arctic, as people probably know, one of the most important species is the caribou. And caribou also have been declining at really an unprecedented rate. And I want to show you just another figure here. Might be hard to see from the back, but the key thing you see here is the circumpolar distribution of caribou around the Arctic. The red indicates populations that are declining. You see very little bits of green in there, and the green that you see in Canada is no longer green. So those populations are also declining. In fact, across 11 barren ground population herds in Canada, there is only 1 that has started to increase again. And the lines on these are even steeper in the most recent years. What's causing this is probably, it's thought to be really the cumulative impacts of a lot of things: climate change, development, and also infectious diseases. And so our work really is aimed at trying to understand these processes to take a variety of sources of knowledge, both scientific knowledge, local knowledge, traditional knowledge, to try and understand these systems a little bit better.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Jackie, in what ways do you see your research connecting with Susan's? It strikes me that the places of concern for wildlife decline might also be places of focus in your research.
Yeah, so I work a lot on sea ice change and shipping in the Arctic. And so the exact same places where we have known areas of high density of marine mammals and where their migratory ranges are is the exact areas where we're seeing increases in shipping. It's also the exact areas where Indigenous people are engaging in harvesting activities. So we've spent a considerable amount of time reconstructing historic shipping trends spatially because we didn't really have a good understanding of how this has changed over time, and this is going to play a really important role in the future. Trade is a really big topic right now in our country, and trade through the Northwest Passage, it will be a reality at some point. So we spend a lot of time looking at what are the changes in shipping traffic. And you can see through this map the majority of increase. So the red areas is where we've seen the most significant increases in traffic. And you can see that we are seeing increases in the southern route of the Northwest Passage, which is right through here. This is the northern route of the Northwest Passage, and this is the real route that people are interested in. It's the route that Franklin was interested in had he made it. And also in Hudson Strait across here. And these are all the communities that are, the red dots are the communities experiencing a significant increase in ship traffic. But a really important point to be made is that in Canada, when you compare Canada to other Arctic nations, we have very little traffic still. So we have time, and we need time, because we also have the least number of icebreakers for the amount of coastline that we have to patrol of any Arctic nation. So we do have some work to do in managing this region. So most of the traffic is in the European Arctic. Most of the interest is in the Northeast Passage through Russia. In Canada, we're not seeing that yet. Why are we not seeing that? It's actually because of climate change. So people think that climate change is just going to, in a linear way, mean open water, more ships. But the reality is the ice pack here, the multi-year ice pack, is breaking up. And where is it flowing? It's flowing right into the Canadian Arctic archipelago. So it's actually more dangerous now to ship through the Canadian Arctic than it was in the past because of climate change. That's really largely what's limiting trade through the Northwest Passage at the moment, because you don't save time if you run into huge chunks of ice. So I think that's an important point, because I think we need not to be alarmist about this massive increase in ship traffic in the region. But at the same time, I always like to say this, the consequences of an incident in the Canadian Arctic are much more significant than in the European Arctic. It's more remote, the weather is more harsh, it's a longer distance to any search and rescue, we don't have the infrastructure of other places. If we have an oil spill in the region, it's major. So we are working at putting together an oil spill and ice research network at the moment, which I think will be really important in the future. That being said, I said earlier that we expect the passage to be largely open in the summer, sometime between 2030 and 2070. This was a great piece of research by Smith and Stevenson. They're projecting that the passage, the Northwest Passage right here, the northern route, will be open in the 2050 time period in a mid-emission scenario, so sort of the average status quo scenario. It's a RCP 4.5. They expect that to be open. The other thing we need to think about is technology development. We think, okay, we probably have till 2050. Not really, because people, ship technology is increasing all the time. Ship design has improved enormously. The Chinese have built an icebreaker. It was in the Canadian Arctic last summer, the Snow Dragon. It's capable of breaking through 1.5 meters of multi-year ice. That's only going to increase as ships and technology are improved. So when you combine climate change with technology development and you include international interest, economic interest, we are going to see the Northwest Passage becoming a global trade route before 2070, for sure, in my opinion. You know, and China just released a white paper, their Arctic policy. The first line, I have a copy of it right here. The first line in that document says global warming has caused massive ice melting and snow melt, et cetera. And they explicitly state in that document that they're interested in working with the international community to establish what they're calling the Polar Silk Road. So there is international interest here. This is not in the future. You know, we keep saying, you know, the running dialogue in Canada has been, we have time. We have time, the Northwest Passage is not opening. We do have time. We have time to do it right, but we have to start right now.
Thank you so much. Time to do it right. Well, Jackie's alluded to us that there are implications. And so if I were to draw a conclusion from the research that you've both highlighted, is that any change in one place in the Arctic has consequences and implications on a whole range of ecosystem components, including communities. Could you expand on the human dimension in the Arctic? What are some of the critical issues facing communities and Canada that can be correlated with climate change? Please, Susan.
Sure. I just actually wanted to touch on what Jackie said with respect to the shipping. We look at the Arctic and we see all those islands up there and we see the shipping routes that she's demonstrated to us. Those islands are full of animals. And the shipping coming across there, the decrease, sea ice is a habitat. It's a really important habitat that maintains continuity for caribou populations and fox populations and others across the Arctic. And so when I see the changes and the predictions and the shipping routes, in the back of my mind is always thinking, okay, what are the caribou going to do? We're going to have increasingly fragmented populations. And also, if we've got icebreakers that can break through that 1.5 meters of ice, what does that mean when those caribou are trying to get across in the winter? So again, as Jackie said, we can do it right. We just have to be thinking about this. Beyond that, I think one of the greatest challenges we have in the Canadian Arctic, with or without climate change, is food security. And I'll come back to why wildlife matter there, but I want to show you a figure that is, to me, very shocking. Right-hand side is Canada, with gray being people who are food secure, gray or green, whatever it looks like there. The orange and the dark gray are severe food insecurity, moderate food insecurity. If we look to the left at Nunavut, this is a terrible national embarrassment, that we've got 70% of the Nunavut Inuit population are food insecure. 75% of preschoolers don't get enough food every day. This is Canada, and I think this is a real big embarrassment. The causes of this, as we know, relate to many things. One being the cost, the sheer cost of getting food up there. If it comes by plane or by boat, perishables freeze on the runways, the quality of food is poor, and the costs are very high. Secondly, we've got an incredibly high level of poverty up in the Arctic communities. So even if the food gets there, it costs a lot, people can't buy it. Our work in my lab really looks at how wildlife may be an opportunity to combat this food insecurity. So we know that Indigenous people across the north eat all sorts of different types of wildlife, whether it be fish, birds, caribou, muskox, and seals. And this is a really, really healthy source of food. The protein is much higher than your regular beef, and the fat is much lower, so a very high quality of food. So healthy wildlife populations can mean healthy communities if people have access to that food and it's there and sustainable. The second thing with wildlife is it also provides a really important source of income. So through sport hunting, through commercial harvests, through the handicrafts, through tourism, wildlife can put money into people's pockets so that they can also buy food. And I think we need to think about this economy as we develop the North. It is a really important economy for the North. It provides income to communities, and it also allows people to maintain a lifestyle that keeps them linked to the land. The third thing I want to talk about there is wildlife is not just food, but it's also part of the essence of Indigenous people in the North. So this quote here really tells you our traditional foods are much more than calories or nutrients. They are a lifeline throughout our culture and reflect the health of the entire Arctic ecosystem. I think this is a really important thing when we talk about healthy communities. This tie to the land is critical. Yet, in our current regime of climate change, emerging diseases, people hear so much on the radio, they hear from the news, they hear alarmist media reports about bird flu, mad cow disease, chronic wasting disease, and they start to doubt the safety of their food. They are their own butchers, they're their own inspectors. You and I go to the store, we have a big stamp that says inspected, and we get that meat. But if you're the one going out there to get your own meat, and it looks a little bit different, and maybe the traditional knowledge about animal health hasn't been passed down, you start to doubt the safety of that food. And that just exacerbates the issues around food insecurity. If we put a dollar figure to the value of wildlife, and there's been a few studies looking at the actual economic value of wildlife in the north. In Nunavut, it's thought that the harvesting economy, so covering a variety of species, is worth about 40 million a year. If we think of a specific species, the caribou, there's been a study done on the Beverly Kamanuriak caribou herds. In 2007, when there were still lots of caribou around, those animals, the harvesting economy for those animals was worth 20 million a year. And that touched Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So quite a high value for the harvesting. So that's food replacement value and sales of products from those animals. Today, both those herds have plummeted, and so that value has been lost. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I couldn't help but think of back home. Jackie talks about the ice. Susan, you talk about the wildlife and our communities. And well, first of all, it's making me hungry for some seal. But it certainly doesn't make me think about the store products back home. The prices are incredibly high. I saw a picture. We post pictures with each other on Facebook about the cost of foods. A young friend yesterday posted a bottle of cranberry juice. It's good for the body, right? $17. And but we're dependent on the food that's shipped up north. And so with ice melting and the season for shipping extending, as Jackie's alluded to, is this a good development for communities? Jackie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be. And that's exactly right. It's amazing, the price of goods. You know, our per diems when we do research in the north go way up because you just can't afford to eat and think about living there year round. The country food that Susan was alluding to is essential to that diet. But in today's day and age, we also have to supplement country food with store-bought food. And store-bought food gets to the north by ship. Imagine how much the store-bought food would cost if we flew it all in. So almost 95% of all food going to Nunavut comes by ship. And so with the ice changing, there will be opportunities. But right now, I think it's important to paint a picture of what the infrastructure looks like in these communities. There is no deep water port. There's no barges, or sorry, there's no wharfs. This is not Greenland or even Russia. We have beaches so resupply vessels are going up. They're having to take stuff off the ships, put them on barges, tug the barges in, and unload it with big loaders. You can see I'm not in construction. And bring it into the communities. This is an enormous cost. So even though, yes, we will see increased shipping opportunities, the lack of infrastructure that exists currently will limit the opportunities for bringing food costs down. And bringing food costs down is essential. It's one of the major, you know, Susan was dead on. It's one of the major issues. But shipping is, the last point I want to make about shipping is it's kind of an invisible industry. We don't think about it, especially in Canada. We're such a large nation. We do have 3 coasts, but when you live anywhere off the coast, we don't think about ships. But 90% of everything in this room, the clothes you're wearing, the tables you're touching, came here by ship. So it's a really important industry that we don't think about, that we do need to pay attention to. It impacts our economy, well-being, everything.
Thank you so much. Well, I think Susan and Jackie have given us some very accurate information. I certainly sign off on it. Great work, great work. Let's talk about solutions. We've heard about their work, what's happening up there, the implications. Let's talk about solutions and the way forward. Our relationship as Inuit, our relationship with the ice and the water and the land and the animals is absolutely integral. You might think of ice as a hindrance to moving through the water. Ice for us are highways to food. It represents a place where we can practice our culture, our language, strengthening our families and our language. You know, snow might be something that's wonderful, and you know, you appreciate the first snowfall of the year. Snow for us is absolutely important. Snow is like trees for us. Trees clean the air. Snow does that for us. So if you appreciate how snow is so important for us. But I digress. Knowledge. We're hearing some wonderful knowledge from the science community, what I call Western science. There's also Inuit science. You have probably heard of traditional knowledge or Inuit knowledge. I think it does a disservice to our knowledge as Inuit. Inuit, I don't call it Inuit knowledge, Inuit science. And we have our own scientists, our elders are scientists, our young people are scientists. So in that regard, so let me ask you two, have you relied on Inuit knowledge? Are you using it? Give us some examples, please.
Yeah. So I started my career as a scientist, looking really narrowly at parasites, wildlife, how is this affecting the animals? That was my world, it was quite narrow. Through time, through some really good mentorship in the north, I was brought into the communities. I learned that actually these animals that I was looking at diseases of were people's food. As my career progressed, I realized that also the people are out on the land. They are there every single day. I'm only up there as a researcher a few times a year. I have a snapshot in time. So I started to work very closely with communities to understand what it is they're seeing out on the land, to work with them from the perspective of doing scientific sampling from animals that they were harvesting for food anyway. So we built those partnerships. But this is still just a scientist working with Indigenous people to get samples. As time went on, I was also very much informed by the stories people told me about wildlife out there. How are the wildlife doing? What were they seeing? And I would incorporate a lot of that into my research questions, but nothing really formally. In the last decade, I would say we've really moved beyond that to say, you know what, there's really valuable information that people have. There's Inuit science, Inuit knowledge that can be incorporated and guide research. So what we do now with this species here, as a matter of fact, is we've got a program where we are working with communities of Cambridge Bay, Ulukhokto, and Kugluktuk up in the Western Arctic to gather traditional or local knowledge about animal health. And what we found, so we do individual interviews, we do group interviews in a very standardized way, systematic way, that allows us to gather that knowledge, record that knowledge, and use that for wildlife management. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the places I've been working, both the muskox populations and caribou populations have declined. When we know that from scientific surveys. But a lot of the time we don't really understand why. When we talk to people in the communities, they tell us things like, the animals are skinny. And you can bet that people who are hunting these animals know if they're skinny or fat. So we get good ideas of body condition. They tell us we're seeing some really weird things. They tell us we're not seeing any calves out there. All of these things together start to tell us the why. So the science tells us the number of animals out there, but that's just a plane flying over the tundra. It's not the people on the ground. The challenge has always been is that the Indigenous knowledge is often used, it's anecdote. It's like, yeah, it's there and there's something happening, but how do we use this? And the work that my students have been doing recently has been able to get actually incorporated into management plans. It goes to the table equal to the science now, and it's used to make decisions on how the caribou will be managed, how the muskoxen will be managed. One other piece of that, if I may, is I mentioned that we had seen die-offs of muskoxen when we started that work. It is cold up there. And we, as scientists, had heard about 10 dead muskoxen near Cambridge Bay. And that was in 2010. And then a few others found dead in 2011. So we thought, oh, there was a die-off in 2010. And we started our research and we looked at the climate records and we did all sorts of things to think about why did muskoxen die that year. 2014, we went back to we were working in the communities, we did interviews with people in Cambridge Bay, and they said, yeah, there were a few dead muskoxen in 2010, but there were far more in 2011, and there were far more in 2012. Totally missed by science. And it wasn't until we went into that community and talked to people, and in a very systematic way said, what have you seen for dead animals out there? And are these different than just animals that have normally dropped dead or normally killed by predators or things like that? And they were able to tell us that. That changes our science entirely, because we no longer are thinking 2010 was a die-off. We now know that 2012 was the peak, and there was a whole big die-off happening around that. Not only is that relevant for people in the north for understanding the muskoxen for human health, because the animals were dying from pathogens that infect people, but it's also important for our national trade. We need to know what's out there in our wildlife. We need to know what diseases are out there if we are going to maintain a healthy international trade of our livestock and food industries. So.
But is there a new way of doing science then? Is there a new way of doing research?
I think there is a new way, and I think it's a challenge because this is way outside of our comfort zone as scientists. But working together, having teams with social scientists, with the Indigenous partners. I mean, we work very closely with the Hunter and Trappers organization. We're guided by them. And that allows us to get over our barriers, our fears, and move into this. It also allows us to no longer have the very colonial government management of wildlife, but the co-management boards come in. And when we take this information to the communities or to these meetings, the data are generated from two sources. The data are co-generated, it's co-learning. And when that happens, it's far better accepted by both parties, because everybody says, yeah, actually we are seeing similar things. Or if we're not seeing similar things, why is that? So I think that is the way we need to be moving. And I guess the other piece of that too is a lot of this work also involves engagement of youth. And the population of Nunavut, Northwest Territories, is a very young population. The youth are the future. So we engage them at all steps of this. My students, my graduate students, when they're in the communities, they're working in the classrooms, they're bringing that science into the classrooms. It's just critical to build that capacity. But we do a lot of talking about capacity building in the north. The other side of that is making southern scientists far better northern researchers. And that means we no longer just come up to the north, take our work and leave, but we immerse our students in the communities. And I think when it comes to things like infrastructure, housing comes up all the time. Well, the cost of research in the north is a fortune. So to put a student in a community for more than a few days costs a fortune. But in order for us to really do science in a different way, we need to bring these pieces together, and we need to spend extended time periods there teaching our southern scientists how to be better northern researchers.
Excellent, thanks so much. So my graduate research interest is around the governing of research in the Arctic, and it's been quite revealing to me. Susan talks about capacity building. Well, yes, a good point. If you're working about the north, you hear that capacity is an issue up there. And so we need to build capacity. Well, from a research perspective, that might mean, well, we need to build an army of Inuit researchers. But my point is that I think Inuit becoming better researchers, but I think researchers becoming better Inuit. I had to throw that in there. So it shouldn't be a one-way. I appreciate the physical sciences here. This is so important to me because my observations is that social sciences are doing a great job in deconstructing methodology and coming up with new ways. But we're hearing some promising work on a new generation of researchers in this country from the physical sciences, so I appreciate that very, very much. Now, in terms of solutions, let's continue that very quickly. My point here is that capacity building isn't just about becoming an academically trained researcher. Let's understand and appreciate the assets. Inuit are on the land. Doesn't it seem logical that we are the observers, the researchers, giving real-time data? There are some promising partnerships happening between universities and Inuit communities. Hunters, well, we might think of hunters as a traditional activity, but I call them on-the-land practitioners. And so why can't we evolve our thinking to suggest that they be on the land, full-time, employed? Why do we have to just get an office job? Why can't we be on the land? Why can't we think innovatively like that? We need some big thinking. So. Thank you so much. Jackie, please, can you add to this part of the conversation?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, yes, as in I can add, and yes, as in I completely agree entirely. We do need science jobs in the North. You know, I'll give you one example from the work that we do. One of the things we don't do well as scientists is understand ice thickness. Ice thickness is really important. It doesn't really matter how much ice there is, it matters how thick it is. You know, this icebreaker can go through 1.5 meters of ice. Okay, great. Well, where can it actually go? Satellite images don't help us with that. We have spent literally millions of dollars flying airplanes over the Arctic with EM3s, measuring the thickness of ice. So we need to know this. Well, Inuit are on the land pulling kamatiks behind snowmobiles all the time. Why are we not working with Inuit in paid jobs? And in fact, we are, because this is one of the science projects that I'm involved in. But we're not doing it very much, and we're not doing it very well. There are so many ways that we can do exactly what Pitseolak is talking about. Imagine having you know, northern scientists trained in Inuit knowledge, because you know, through their own culture, and southern scientists coming together. You know, we need people monitoring the Arctic as well, security, sovereignty, all of these, you know, important things. We need people monitoring the wrecks of Erebus and Terror. And who's there? I'm not there. I'm there about 2 weeks of the year since I have little kids. I used to be there more. The Inuit are there. So there are ways to make this happen. And the point about that I want to make, when you think about it holistically from a health perspective, it is the young men that are at highest risk of suicide. The suicide rates are the highest with young men. Why is that? Women have adapted into the market economy in a much smoother way. More women are working in government jobs and different service jobs. It's the young men in the Arctic that we need to worry about. In my world, I worry about the young women scientists. But in the North, it's the young men. If young men, and the odd woman, because there are female hunters, are out on the land, connecting with their culture, and being paid to hunt, being paid to be scientists, being paid to monitor this region, it's really a win-win. And in fact, I think it will lead to a decreased suicide rates. So we need to think about this in the holistic perspective, not just we need northern scientists to help us scientists. You know, this is a win-win-win situation. If we work together, that's the key. We tend to be a little siloed in our thinking, not just as academics, but also as government departments and employees, and you know, everywhere. It's anyway. I'll stop there.
I appreciate you being the added voice to this, very much so. So, we've heard some great stuff. It's been a speed dating moment for us. Let's get to some conclusions. So we heard Jackie and Susan talk about the biophysical context, some of the issues that are culturally relevant. So with that, health for Inuit is so important. We encourage both sciences to continue to work together. And we have the opportunity, as Jackie mentioned, to do things right. Susan, thank you so much for your interventions as well. Caribou, for us, is a great concern. When I was 12 years old, first hunting with my uncle, I'll never forget this moment. He took me in the fall, and he made me creep up to a ledge on a hill. And he asked me to be very quiet. And he asked me to peer over. And in that second, I saw thousands of caribou walking as if the land itself was moving. It was alive. And those memories are just memories now for me. because that is not available to us. Our caribou, our seal, you can't imagine how important that is to us as a people, and working with the science community is so important. Inuit are proud Canadians, but they're also recognizing that research has a role to play. Continued partnerships are so important. Research has been a dirty word for Indigenous communities in this country for a long time, for good reason, but Inuit are very pragmatic people, willing to work in partnership. I encourage all of the science funding agencies to recognize this shift. We're seeing some great, responsible researchers who are working with communities. Communities want these partnerships. I encourage you to know more about the Arctic. So I hope we have a chance to spend a few minutes now. Any questions? Est-ce qu'il y a des questions maintenant? S'il vous plaît, if you could, just approach the microphones and please take a moment and engage with our conversation.
I might want to ask a difficult question, although you've provided part of the answer. But I value very much the link you make between research and community development. And I would like to hear more from on the perspective of local researchers and how, as you just said, research can be good, not only good in terms of image, but also good in terms of actually connecting to the actual people in the North. So how can we hear more along those lines of making the shift from, I'm not sure exactly what you meant, but I have an idea, the bad word equal to research from to being a good word being researched in the North from a community perspective.
Sure, maybe I'll. So the question is, how can we move from bad research to good research working with communities in the North? And I think there is a long legacy of researchers, as Pitseolak has said, that research is a bad word in the communities. I think a few things. One example is CHARS, Canadian High Arctic Research Station, which is desperately looking for qualified people to work in the North. I think we do need to build that capacity from the youth up. We need to work with the communities to get kids through school, through university, so that they can come and fill these positions. There's lots of jobs up there. We just need to be able to invest in that training so that the kids can get there and continue to be the leaders in the North, but they can fill those jobs instead of folks from the South. And that's a lot of work to do that, and it's a lot of dedication. I think one thing, International Polar Year during that time period, so that's 2007 to 2009, there's a real push that researchers had to work with the communities. You no longer could go up there and take your work and leave. You had to have a community partner. You had to bring that back. The funding agencies are always the places, when push comes to shove, if the funding agency says you have to do this, then you have to do it. And I think that's a piece that does need to continue it. And I think it has in Tri-Council. I've seen the change over time that the community engagement, the return to the community has been a critical piece.
Yeah, and in NCEs, which are Network Centers of Excellence, are really one of the best platforms for this, because in that NCEs make us work interdisciplinarily. It's NSERC, SSHRC, NCHR that come together. It's one of the main, at least academic mechanisms where we can spend dollars in the community. Where sometimes our hands are tied by where the dollars come from and what we're allowed to use the dollars for. And NCEs are great, like ArcticNet has been running for a long time. We can pass those dollars on to the communities. So we need, I completely agree, it starts with the policy structures that exist in Tri-Council and in other areas.
I need to invest a comment, and I appreciate your question very much. When I meant bad research. Now, we know if we understand ethics in human research, those in the social sciences have a good handle on this if you need your TCPS2 training certificate. But in that regard, research about Indigenous people, the narratives that are constructed, the voices that are afforded, the context that it's provided, That has been the historical way that research is revealed. So on and or about Indigenous people, a shift towards with and by Indigenous people is absolutely critical. We have to remove the barriers in funding, the barriers in education, and so in that regard, we need to move forward. And we talked about knowledge. We talked about who are the holders of truth, and I appreciate how research and science is so methodologically and ethically grounded, but let's think more about incorporating equal partnerships. Because in the North, there are land claim agreements, there are legal rights and responsibilities, there are relationships forming, there are promises made, and let's move that towards the research community. So thank you so much. We have 3 very quick questions.
Sure. Hi. Thank you very much. I'm Perry Johnston from Universities Canada, and I just want to commend you on a really great talk this morning. I feel I've learned a great deal, so thanks to the 3 of you. I just want to flag 2 things. One is that there actually is going to be a new research strategy being launched by Inuit Pitseolak Kanatami on Thursday. So I would encourage all of you to look at that great strategy. It's really, really important, and it feeds very much into the conversation this morning. The question I actually have is about shipping, but from the notion of tourism and cruise ships. I wondered if there's some comments that you might have about the policy implications and issues, both from where there could be a positive element, but also some of the negative and big challenges. There's been some news documentaries in the last year or so about the first big cruise ship that went through, and I'm just wondering if you had some comments across the panel. Thank you.
I can comment on that for sure. Yeah, tourism is the fastest growing sector of marine transportation in the Canadian Arctic right now, and we did see the Crystal Serenity go through the passage twice now. And so there's a lot of attention paid to it. Pleasure craft, the small yachts, are the fastest growing sector. So they've increased by about 400% in the last 7 years. So it's both good and bad. It's good because it encourages local communities, local economic development, arts and handicrafts to be sold to these ships. But at the same time, the cruise industry in general there's high economic leakage. You eat your food, you sleep, you buy stuff on the boat. You even buy carvings, Inuit carvings on the boat. So, so we are always encouraging people. I've been on these ships for research. I have to go on these cruises. I'm always encouraging people to buy from the local artists, to have cash in hand, but there's a lot of issues. The regulatory environment is very strict. It does not benefit Canada. The way that our Coasting Trade Act works, the way that, it's very complicated, and if you're really interested, I can tell you, I can talk all about it. But we're definitely at disadvantage in terms of the tourism industry being a real savior economically for the North. It's always going to be a supplementary industry with issues. But we need to do better. And I'm really excited. The ISR is writing a cruise and yacht management plan right now, and the Inuvialuit settlement region. The Inuvialuit settlement region is writing a cruise and yacht management plan, but it's actually the land claim organization that's writing it, not the territorial government. I see that as a really positive change for improving opportunities.
Appreciate the questions. We have about a minute, actually. So can we have the 2 questions, not simultaneously, of course, but very quickly concurrent?
Okay, so I'm Marcia McNutt, president of the U.S. Academy of Sciences. We've got 3 great scientists here. Given that the die is cast, and no matter what we do with Paris, changes are coming to the Arctic. We've got 3 great scientists here. What would you tell the Inuit to do in terms of changes in the land and sea so that they can best prepare for the changes ahead, so that they can be ahead of the curve, given that Charles Darwin said, it's not the most intelligent or the strongest that survive, but those who best adapt to change?
Sir?
That's an excellent introduction to the point I want to make. And that is, we see great science being done. I'm an engineer. I see very little, quite inadequate emphasis on what we do with the knowledge that we gain to change the technology that is going to be appropriate for the future. So we have, I suspect here we have got far more scientists understanding the problem. Probably a few of you are engineers. What do we do to change to accommodate the enormous changes which are happening in the future? So I appeal for support to the technology to deal with the science. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I must leave those as comments, and I appreciate your perspectives. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful experience. I would like to invite Maria from PAGSE to do the closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maria DeRosa, and I'm chair of the Partnership Group for Science and Engineering. I hope you all really enjoyed as much as I did this amazing collaboration between social science. This was amazing. Let's give them one more round of applause. That was wonderful. Thank you. I want to invite Mr. Bruce Stanton, Deputy Speaker, to offer our thanks to the panelists.
Well, thank you, Maria. And listen, we're almost out of time. Let me just say on behalf of our sponsors, certainly the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Honourable Jeff Regan, Speaker of the Senate, the Honourable George Fury, and other parliamentarians who sponsor both Big Ideas and the Bacon and Eggheads Breakfast, which were combined this morning, two wonderful organizations, certainly the Federation as well as PAGSE, coming together to put these kinds of presentations on. To our guests this morning, and to all three of you, you've taken us on a trip to the Arctic this morning. We've gained incredible insights into the kind of work that you're doing. This is all so consequential for us as a country. We are parliamentarians, and those who support the work of parliamentarians, we look to you, those in the science and in the research field, to be able to show us the way. We have to come up with the policies and provide the funding that's necessary to get that done, and we take your lead in showing us the way forward. You've certainly given us a taste of that this morning. I'm sure that's going to pique our appetites. I hope that will be the case in the days ahead and the months ahead, and so we're indebted to your presentation this morning. Delighted to have you here, all three of you, and I have a small gift for each that I'll present to you, and on behalf, I'm sure that you share with me our wonderful appreciation for our professors here this morning. They've done a fantastic job. Thank you so much.